Tonight, a first for Question Time. Our audience is made up entirely of undecided voters. And at the beginning of an election year, where better place to start than with an audience of people whose votes are up for grabs? And where better place to be than Oxford, a city with a world-renowned university with varying political representation at local and national level. Welcome to Question Time. Andrea Leadsom is Health and Social Care Minister. After years in finance, she became an MP in 2010, soon becoming a prominent Brexiteer. She got to the final two alongside Theresa May in the Tory leadership contest of 2016 and has written a book about her political career called Snakes and Ladders. Labour's Shadow International Development Secretary is Lisa Nandy. She's in her 15th year as MP for Wigan. In that time, she shadowed the Foreign Secretary, Energy and Levelling Up briefs, and she came third in her party's leadership contest of 2020. Lord Rose is a Conservative peer and has vast experience in the world of business and retail and was knighted in 2008. He's been CEO at Burton, Argos, M&S, among others, and is now chairman of ASDA. And if Stuart Rose knows all about customer behaviour, then Professor Anand Menon is an expert in political behaviour. He's Director of Research Group UK in a Changing Europe, based at King's College London, and studies what the public makes of political events. Good evening, welcome to our panellists, welcome to you at home, and of course welcome to our audience here. And yes, you heard right at home, this is an audience of undecided voters. This is a first for Question Time. You don't know how you're going to vote in the coming general election, but you are a very important group. You represent 15% of the electorate who are, as you are, undecided. You're still a broad and fair reflection of the political views across the nation, but you are united by one thing, and that is that your vote is up for grabs. Now, I talked to a few of you before we came on air this evening. I just want to hear from some of you as to why you are undecided. So let's start with you in the front here. Let's get a microphone to this lady in the front here in the spotty dress. Yes, so you're undecided. Why is that?
I am. I am struggling at the moment to hear anything that is original, inspirational and most of all realistic with your plans and policies, thinking about our families and our communities, and in particular the NHS, health inequalities, the environment and education as well. Okay. So I just need to hear something realistic and, yeah. Something realistic,
OK. The man next to you.
Hi, good evening. My name's Kyle. I'm the founder of a deep set tech AI startup here in Oxford. I voted Conservative for the last 2 decades, and it's the first time I've been undecided. And that's because we keep getting told we're going to be a centre for technology, an AI powerhouse, that businesses here are the easiest place and the best place to invest in, like the 5.5 million SMEs that exist here, 3/5 of our workforce employed by those companies, and it simply isn't true right now. So I'd like to see some policy that's got clear strategic direction with robust policies that are going to get that money in, get companies like mine and others growing, and get us on a path to a truly global Britain that we were promised for so long.
OK. Man next to you, let's just go along this road for a minute. Yes?
I'm a believer in love for all, hatred for none. I would love to see any party advocate for genuine peace. Sadly, I don't see that in Rishi Sunak or, in fact, in Starmer either. And secondly, on immigration, the Rwanda policy seems to be apparently in shambles. Maybe the BBC need to do a drama on that. But again, you know, I haven't heard anything constructive, compassionate and humane from Labour either.
OK. The woman next to you.
Thank you. So an immediate cultural and structural change, the workload between men and women, so it's much more equal. In the UK, men tend to do more paid work. Women do more unpaid work and caring responsibilities and paid work. And that operating model needs to evolve because it really has to be all hands on deck to reverse this stagnating economy.
All right, and let's have one final view. Yes, from you there.
So for decades, my grandparents, without fail, voted for Labour. And even now, so they're points ahead, according to YouGov, but there's no excitement anymore because...
Not for you?
No, because Labour has converged into the right. And, you know, we can talk about education, we can talk about health, and we can talk about work. But there's no representation left for people from working class backgrounds. And so before we talk about what we're looking for from the potential future leadership, it's important to understand that as young people, I feel disillusioned, and the only really viable option we have is the right. And do we really want to vote for them when they're complicit in a genocide?
Strong words, OK. You can obviously respond to that, Andrea. OK, well, look, that's just a few of you. As I say, you're all undecided. Let's take our first question from Callum Mackenzie.
Thank you, Fiona. Do the British people have an electoral choice anymore? And if so, what is it?
Right. Well, I guess that is the key thing we are here to decide tonight. OK, Andrea. Do people have a political choice? And if so, what is it?
They absolutely do, yes. I think under the Conservatives, I totally get that we have been in power for 14 years, and I understand a lot of people say, well, what's new about you? How can you possibly be new? 14 years. But actually, in Rishi Sunak, we do have a Prime Minister who is taking very long-term decisions. If you look at some of the things he did during COVID lockdown, he provided that £450 billion of funding that kept people in work, kept businesses afloat, so we were the fastest to recover our economy after COVID. We were also the fastest to vaccinate our entire population. And subsequent to that, he's made some very long-term decisions about new nuclear, about things like the smoke-free generation, which is a bill I'm proud to be taking through in government to try and ensure that future generations of children don't become smokers. And the final point I'd raise is the one that's dearest to my heart, which is his backing for family hubs, which is providing much more support for families with new babies to have education, but also friendship, support at that critical time of life, the very beginning, which is all about giving the next generation of children the best possible start.
Lisa. Callum Mackenzie, do the people have an electoral choice anymore?
I mean, it won't surprise you that I've come here to tell an audience of undecided voters that you absolutely do. But what I'm not going to do is spend much time talking about the Tories. In fact, I'm not going to spend any time talking about the Tories' record because I think they're doing it to themselves, frankly, at the moment. And what I want to talk to you about is what difference a Labour government could make. We're under no illusions about the scale of the challenge that we will inherit if you trust us with your vote at the next general election. The lady in the audience who kicked us off talked about wanting to hear inspiration, but also realistic policies that can change people's lives. And so I make no apology for saying that we're not going to go to the country with a plan that costs you lots in unfunded spending commitments because it's your money and people haven't got a lot of it at the moment. But what we have got is a plan for the National Health Service to get waiting lists down. It is an absolute scandal that children are waiting more than a year for a hospital appointment, 7 million people on those waiting lists, and that children are going into A&E departments simply to have their teeth pulled because they can't get a dentist appointment. We've got a serious plan to get Britain building because we've got a housing crisis in this country, 1 million people on social housing waiting lists and a generational crisis in renting and home ownership. We've got a serious plan to invest in clean energy so that we have energy security again in this country, so that we cut people's bills and we create good jobs in every part of the country. And so I say to you that don't believe this message that things can't be different. They're tough, yes, but with relentlessness and energy and determination and courage, we can turn that situation around. Maybe not overnight, but I have felt in every part of this country over the last decade, as difficult as things have got for people, that ambition is right there in every community. Okay. Just imagine what this country could be with a government, a Labour government, that had that same level of ambition for Britain. OK,
there's lots of hands up. Let's hear from some of you. Yes, the one right in the middle at the very back. Yes.
Hi. So why doesn't Labour lift the child benefit cap to 2 children and immediately raise children out of poverty? When I saw that reaction of Keir Starmer and Labour to that call, that's what made me really think and say, I cannot vote for you. So that's such a basic, fundamental way of raising these children out of poverty. Why don't you act on it?
You better answer that.
Yeah, thank you. Just very briefly on that to give the others time to talk, because we're not going to make any commitments ahead of the next general election that we don't know we can keep. People have had enough of promises that have been made that have been broken. And we've seen what happens when
you're
you
promising to spend money on some things, and
Sure.
what you're asking is why are you not choosing to spend money on that?
but we've seen what happens when you have prime ministers come forward with half-baked plans that they don't know how to fund. They crash the economy and leave working people paying the price for decades and decades to come. So we have committed ahead of the next election to setting out a child poverty plan. You'll know that we opposed the child benefit limit when it came in, and we would like to see it removed at the earliest opportunity. But we're going. But when we make those commitments about lifting children out of poverty, you can be sure that we will keep them.
Woman there in the black and white top.
Yeah, linked to children's, what approach would the panel take to support schools and the NHS to support children with emotional and mental health needs?
OK, I'm going to make a note of some of these and come back to them, if that's all right, just to allow more people on the panel to speak. Yes, there's a man at the very back with glasses. Let's hear what you've got to say.
Hi, thank you very much. So if I could correct the panel member, it was not 450 billion, it was 800 billion that was spent during COVID. And I see no reason at all why we can't have some of that money back, okay, because the average billionaire in this country is some £720 million better off over COVID, whilst we are all much worse off. So is there any reason why we can't have progressive tax, which brings wealth back from those who have it, back to those of us that don't, particularly as 1 in 15 of us are destitute?
OK, and the person there right in the middle with the glasses on. Yes, and the brown black top.
I think the crux of the question was about choice, and in Britain you've got two parties really that are going to win out, and they seem to be converging year on year towards the centre, and so that's limiting choice. It would be almost turkeys voting for Christmas, but is there any appetite in Parliament to get rid of first past the post, which is limiting it to just the two biggest parties?
Right, change the whole voting system. OK, the man next to you. The man next to you. Yes.
If I might be as bold as to say, I think...
Oh, do be bold. We like that on question time. Come on.
The point that I might be speaking alone here is that, Andrea, you speak so boldly about the wonderful things that Conservative are doing, but I think a lot of us might be sitting here thinking what you're rejoicing at is actually what we think is a common obligation for government to do. There is no point telling us that we're going to fix the NHS, because the NHS is not a new initiative. What you're celebrating, actually, we expect you to do. It's your obligation as government to do that. What we're asking is, what are we doing beyond that ordinary? Yeah. What happened during COVID was absolutely marvellous, but that's what your job is to do. Yes. What we're asking is, what's beyond that that is not lurching from crisis to crisis?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Andrew, look,
it's a very fair challenge.
Okay. Briefly, and then I want to come to the rest of the panel.
It's a very fair challenge. And the stark reality is, like it or not, we have faced two once-in-100 years crises in the last few years. A global pandemic closely followed by a major war in Europe.
But the NHS was suffering before, if we're going to talk about the NHS, was suffering before either of those things happened.
So you say the NHS was suffering. I mean, it is. You know, we had the financial crisis in 2010, and that led to major problems with our fiscal position. That was just about righting itself, and then we had the COVID lockdown. So these things, you're absolutely right, and it's a fair challenge. Government's duty is to make life as good as it possibly can for the people. And to that gentleman's point, it was £450 billion on furlough, which was the bit that kept jobs and businesses afloat during COVID, and is the reason we recovered faster. But you say, what can we do? I mean, just one really good example, I think, and I'd like to do a big shout out to all GPs, is that GPs have delivered 50 million more appointments a year, which was a manifesto commitment of ours in 2019. And that is actually really providing the support for well-being, for children, for families at the front end that they desperately need. And that's just a recent, brilliant target that's been met. And it is
I must bring the rest of the panel in, sorry, Anna, forgive me for interrupting.
Absolutely.
So, Anna, let me come to you. So, actually, before we tackle some of these points, given that we have an audience of undecided voters here, just tell us a moment why a group like this, the group that you represent, is so important when it comes to the election.
Well, because ultimately it's swing voters, it's the people who are undecided that are going to make the difference in this election. And it's you that these political parties are fighting for the votes of, I mean, the point the gentleman made about first past the post is absolutely right. First past the post narrows your choice. You're essentially going to get either a Labour or a Conservative government out of an election. It's a choice we've made as a country. There are other electoral systems that will give you a broader choice. We are where we are. I think it's unfair to say the parties are too similar and there isn't a choice. I mean, if you
but
think
that is
about...
nonetheless what some people are saying. And
Yeah,
I mean, if that's what they think, that's what they think.
I mean, it strikes me as being unfair if you think about what Labour are saying on green investment, if you think about the priority that the Tories are trying to place on future tax cuts. And I think those differences will become clearer as the election approaches. But I'll just caution one thing, which is sometimes our problems stem from the fact that there is too much partisan difference. Let me give you one example of this, which is social care. Whenever a party puts forward a proposal for social care, and God knows we need a solution to social care, it is one of the most severe problems facing this country, the other party shoots it down. 2010, Labour came out with a perfectly good plan for social care. The Tories called it a death tax. 2017, Theresa May came out with a pretty good plan for social care. Labour shot it down as dementia tax. And one of the problems we have in our politics at the moment is not that they're too similar, but they spend so much time fighting about each other that we can't do policies for the medium and the long term. And a lot of the problems we face in this country now require solutions that are going to last beyond one parliament, possibly beyond two parliaments. So sometimes, actually, I'd like to see the parties working together a little bit more.
So
how do
we achieve that, given that I can't think of many examples of that happening in my lifetime?
It is very, very hard to do.
I think there are. I think there are a number.
I mean, but in terms of, well, I'm just you forgive me, just to hear a bit more from Anand on that point. If you're, I mean, you're talking about social care, for example, that
there are examples of parties working together, but the institutional incentive is not to, isn't it? The institutional incentive is to differentiate yourself, particularly when it comes to elections. We hear a lot about working across the aisle.
And which does happen in terms of great national conflict and international wars and that kind of thing, of course.
It happens day to day, but it's just that you don't see as much of it. What you see is Prime Minister's question time, where we're all screaming and shouting at each other. But go into any committee room on the same day and you'll find MPs working together to try to crack really difficult problems. So it's our fault as much as anybody else's, because we should tell you about it.
So Stuart, I just wanted to pick up on what the man said there at the back, which is what we don't want from government is to do the ordinary. That's just a given. What we want is, what are you going to do beyond that? And is that something that people need to hear in order to decide how they're going to be voting?
Well, listen, there are a lot of very important themes coming out here. And the gentleman who asked the question with the white T-shirt, I didn't hear your name, sir, but
Callum.
Yours was a very important question, because actually, yes, you do have a choice. And the biggest single choice you have got is you have got the right to vote. You live in a democracy. There are around 5 billion people in the world this year who will have the right to vote. And we should be grateful for that. Now, there are two massive elections which will affect us. There's one across the water in the States, which will have an effect on the UK, and there's one in the UK. You, if you're undecided, and if it was me giving you advice, and, I don't want to give you advice, it's not my business, but I would caution you to take your time, think through the issues, talk to the parties, listen to what they've got to say, kick the tires, ask the questions, and say a little bit what JFK said, not what your government can do for you, but what can you do for your country by influencing people and not accepting some of the standard arguments. The other point was a very important point. I want to touch on what you said, Anand. 10 years ago, I did a report for the NHS, right? It took me 6 months. It was a hard piece of work. The government didn't like some of it. It was called Leadership in the NHS. The way they got around not doing anything was to say, we accept all the responsibility, the recommendations. I can tell you nothing's happened. Gordon Messenger did a report about a year ago, and he actually rang me up and said, I've used some of your stuff, Stuart. I'd be interested to see what happens. I happened to bump into a previous Prime Minister, John Major, quite accidentally in the street. And he said, Stuart, how is things with you? And I said, well, John, just help me understand on the political issue of the National Health Service, why can't we have a cross-party commission or something like that, where this is so big, it's eating £185 billion a year, it's growing exponentially, primary care doesn't work properly, social care, as you pointed out, doesn't work properly, the hospitals are absolutely up to their armpits in work, there's 7 million people waiting for a vacancy. This is not a Conservative issue, this is not a Labour issue, this is a national issue that needs to be sorted out. Now, I hear what you may talk about in committee rooms. You can talk, but we've got to walk.
And in terms of talking, Callum's question is, Do the British people have an electoral choice anymore? And Callum's point, actually, tell me if I'm paraphrasing you wrong, is basically you don't feel there's a whole heap of difference between the main parties. I think that's what you're saying.
Yes, and if you'd like me to say a few more words,
sure.
I would love to see a difference on the most important issue in my head at this moment, and it follows on from the gentleman at the front who is calling for peace in the Middle East. And I would say the first of the two leaders that were to come out and demand for a ceasefire in the Middle East would get my vote.
Right, OK. All right. Well, look, we're going to return to a number of the themes that you've raised here so far when I take a few more questions. Just before I do, I just want to let you know at home where we're going to be next week. We will be in Peterborough in Cambridgeshire, and the following week we'll be over in Kent, we'll be in Gillingham. So if you'd like to come and be part of the audience there, and it won't be an audience undecided, it's business as usual, do apply, go to the Question Time website, follow the instructions there, and we'd love to see you. So that is Peterborough and then Gillingham. OK, let's take our second question from Lindsay Draper, and this is something that everyone is talking about at the moment. Lindsay, fire away.
Why has it taken a TV drama for the government to finally take the horrendous miscarriage of justice perpetrated by the Post Office seriously?
Lisa, so this is something that started under a Labour government, it then carried on through a Conservative government, and various things have been done at various points, but I think it's beyond a shadow of doubt that this drama has galvanised a political response in a way that we haven't seen hitherto.
Yeah.
Well, why has it taken that?
Well, I agree, and I think it's right to acknowledge that this has gone on for far too long, that people have been very badly failed. This is one of the worst miscarriages of justice, certainly in my lifetime, and it shouldn't have taken a TV drama to do that.
So what happens in government? I mean, obviously, it's easier for you to talk about when Labour was in power, but what is happening in government that... You know, you've got MPs championing it like James Arbuthnot, you've got court cases going on, you've got postmasters trying to raise it with the relevant ministers, and yet still nothing happens for years and years and years.
Well, actually, it took a significant amount of time to even reach Parliament at all. And I think there are clearly two issues that are emerging in the ongoing inquiry. The first is that the Post Office knew about this for some considerable amount of time. They'd had an external review of their own systems but continued to prosecute people for years afterwards, and that ministers appear to have been told that everything was fine and everything was working, and that was clearly not the case. I think the other thing...
So was it that the ministers, because it was first raised four years after this computer system was introduced, is it that ministers... I'm just trying to understand, because I think we're all wondering, you know, why... Yeah. It's obviously... There's all sorts of parties here that may be at fault. But since we're asking about the government, what happens? Is it the ministers just take what's said at face value, or do they think, why is this guy called Alan Bates, who's now become a household name, contacted me 5 times, maybe I should do something?
Well, I'm trying to answer the question to the best of my knowledge with the information that we have. And to me, it seems pretty clear, actually, that there's a real pattern that emerges with these cases. I represent some of the Hillsborough families, and... You know, I also represent one of the original 555 sub-postmasters who took the High Court case in 2019 and have worked with him and his wife for some time. And there is a clear trend of ordinary people who sound the alarm being ignored and dismissed and being crushed by bigger systems that they can't possibly compete with. So I welcome what the government has said. I think the Minister, Kevin Hollinrake, made a very powerful statement this week about quashing the convictions, about no more delays and about providing compensation. And I'm sure that's right. But for my constituent who lost his post office, almost lost his reputation, their son, who they were guarantors on his mortgage, lost his house, no amount of compensation can undo the wrong that has been done. And what they and many others want to see is that we get to a position where never again can so many ordinary citizens in this country be ignored and dismissed and overlooked by bigger systems. There are some things that clearly can be done and should. One of them that has been suggested for a long time and campaigned for is what's known as the Hillsborough Law, which is a duty of candour on public officials to tell the truth so that there are clear repercussions if you don't. That at least would strengthen a system where a minister is being told something that is clearly untrue. The other thing that the Hillsborough Law would do is to ensure that those who are fighting miscarriages of justice have access to legal aid. One of the big problems that people face in challenging the system is that it's like David and Goliath, and in any democracy worth its salt, that is a situation that cannot be allowed to stand.
Okay. Stuart, why is it taking a TV drama for the government to finally take this seriously?
Well, listen, it's a very, very sad and terrifying thing. I watched the programme. I was nearly brought to tears myself in one or two parts of it, which is quite unusual for me, I must say. But, first of all, toxic culture. Toxic culture in the post office, we can do no wrong. Secondly, there was only one shareholder. The shareholder in the post office was the government. So if this had been a public limited company, there would have been other ways for this information to get out through into other shareholder groups, into shareholders coming as individuals. Then all the reference of that stuff went into the shareholders. We have to be honest, and whether they like the accusation or not, it's true, that those shareholders were reporting through to civil servants. The civil servants were reporting through to ministers. The post office didn't want to admit there was a problem. The civil servants didn't want to admit that there was something wrong, that they should never have given the contract in the first place, and they should certainly have been informed. They may well have been. They probably were about some issues, but they covered it up because nobody wants to admit to failure. And then when it got to the ministers, it had taken a long time. James Arbuthnot was the man who was probably standing alone for a long time, and it took a long time to creep. We should never let it happen again. But remember, there was a similar situation, slightly different, similar situation with Windrush, right? Because it all went through the Home Office. The Home Office was marking its own homework. The Post Office was marking its own homework, and they had the right for private prosecution. So that's what the problem was. We had a bad, malfunctioning structure. And I don't want to segue into it too much, but that's why it's a good thing we've got a COVID inquiry, because lots of things happened in COVID where normal routines were broken, and it's just, this is the way it's going to be, don't argue. And we will find some horror stories.
The man at the very back.
The thing that's been missing from all the statements so far this week is the role of Fujitsu. I think if we were in the US now, Fujitsu would be in the dock and they would be facing really, really serious questions and penalties. I don't understand why the minister didn't. I mean, maybe it's a legal thing, but I think Fujitsu here, you know, given that they are still actively trading with many government departments, who's questioning their role, and what about them footing some of the bill?
Yeah, as I understand it, Fujitsu are going to be giving evidence to the statutory inquiry, but I absolutely hear your point. We haven't heard anything from them so far, certainly not that I'm aware of. Yes, the woman here.
Yes, I mean, a lot has been made of Paula Vennell's role in all of this and the stripping of her
He was the head of the Post
CB,
Office.
of course. And to Stuart's point, you know, do the panel not believe that there are other very senior people who appear to me to be equally culpable, but who for some reason
At the Post Office,
have
you
not
mean?
had any, no, outside of the Post Office in government, and who for some reason, you know, things are being kept quiet? Is there some sort of cover-up going on?
Andrea?
Well, actually, to the question about why does it take a TV programme, I mean, I've watched some of that programme and it is totally harrowing. Nobody could help but be very moved by what you see there. But I must say that a lot of politicians and other people were calling, campaigning for justice for these sub-postmasters for a very long time.
But
And
it didn't
actually,
happen. That's
no,
the
well,
point, Andrea.
it did
happen.
happen actually, because
But in
fact, with the
limited
High Court-
numbers?
yes, in limited numbers. But just to go through the timeline,
We're talking about
I do think it's
4,000
important.
people who may be
I
eligible
totally
for compensation,
agree.
and only 93 have had their convictions overturned.
Just to go through the timeline, in 2019, when the court case Alan Bates had brought forward for the large group of sub-postmasters, that found in 2019 against the Post Office. And so actually there has been a compensation scheme since. They're not good enough, and an inquiry was set up which became a statutory inquiry in 2020, and that has been investigating ever since. And actually it's that to the gentleman's point at the back, is investigating Fujitsu, and will also be looking to this lady's point about other people who were involved and who should be culpable. And it's absolutely right that it is an independent investigation, so independent of government, independent of civil servants.
Yes, but just to come to the question, why has it taken the government so long? The things have been, legal processes have been happening. Yes. But nonetheless, the speed that we have seen in the last few days is It's like night and day. That's something that started in 1999.
That is, of course, true, because we are all, MPs are all in politics to try to help their communities, to make the world around them a better place. And so nobody could help but be moved by that programme and by the profile that it gave to this subject. But all I'm saying is that it's not that nothing was happening beforehand, but I also think that both Stuart and Lisa make absolutely right points about the need to look at this issue of private prosecutions, a private company that only has one shareholder, which is the government, but it's not actually the government, it's the civil service who act as the shareholder. And so all of those processes, how that could happen and drag on for so long is what really needs to be looked at through this independent inquiry.
If I might say, Andrew, the real point is, the gentleman I think at the back, the question is, what we really want is leadership. And somebody should have said, yes, it's easy to say post hoc, up with this, we will not put action this day.
Yes.
And it didn't happen because it gets stuck with the arguments of the judiciary or arguments about process or are we going to give too much to compensation to somebody? Will somebody who might have been guilty get compensated? That's an irrelevance. Let's get it sorted.
Man here in the front.
But this seems to happen. I mean, the post office scandal is absolutely appalling, and it's again the little man against the big company that's believed. And that's the bit that's been the most atrocious thing about it. The same thing happened with the banking industry. You know, many people's lives were destroyed. No one seems to be have gone to jail for it, apart from one poor chap that was gambled too much money. But it's time and time again these things happen, and it's wrong. It's very sad.
Anand, why is it taking a TV drama for this finally to be sorted out?
Well, I mean, I agree to an extent with Andrea. Part of the reason why the TV drama had the impact it had was because politics was very, very slowly moving in that direction anyway. People like Kevin Hollinrake were starting that process and putting it, but it was far, far too slow. And the reason it took a TV drama was because stories are very, very powerful things. The problem, and Lisa's alluded to this is not isolated. We have a contaminated blood scandal that's going to hit the headlines far more than it has to date. We had Hillsborough, and part of this, as Stuart says, is about institutions. The design of the post office was almost there so that everyone could pass the buck. The minister could say, well, the shareholder board will take care of that. The shareholder board would say, well, the minister's not bothered, so it's fine. There's a culture, I think, and it's something we need to think about in the civil service. Why did no one say, hang on a sec, why is the post office saying this to us when we know that there are lots of people all of a sudden being charged with fraud? And I think the culture in Whitehall is not sufficiently one of questioning at the moment. You have to be a brave politician to encourage your civil servants to question what you're saying and question what you're thinking. But we need a lot more of that. I think Lisa's absolutely right that there are issues about access to the law. Under this government, we've seen legal aid cut. And in 2014, there was legislation to make it harder to claim compensation from miscarriages of justice. We need to make it easier for people to access the law, not harder. And the final thing I'd add, and this worries me about the future, is there's a slight reek here of a blind faith in technology. You know, computer says so must be right. And, you know, with AI, with driverless cars, with all those things on the horizon, I think we just need to be aware of that because computers can be wrong.
Okay, well, I suspect we'll be returning to this topic, but I'm going to move on for now, if I may. Lawrence Kelly, where are you?
With annual debt interest payments now running at over £110 billion a year, the scope for tax cuts or big spending plans are curtailed. Will it make any difference who wins the next election?
So I'm assuming from the way you're answering your question, Lawrence, that you think it probably won't.
I think whoever wins the next election will be confronted with the existing problems which are long and intractable. But I certainly think that the debt interest payment will compromise government plans, whoever wins the next election.
OK. Stuart?
Well, sir, I'm afraid you're right. We do have... I saw a survey yesterday, which is in the public domain. I cannot remember actually who ran it, but 2,500 people were asked the other day about what they think the single most important priority was for the UK, and 67% of those 2,500 people said we must get the UK balance sheet back on track. So people do want us to do that. They do expect and understand that may mean that we'll have to be thoughtful about the level of public spending we can afford. So parties, whichever party is in power at the end of this year, and there will be an election this year, has got to think very carefully about what wriggle room they've got, what priorities they want to prioritise, what they want to spend the money on, where they're going to get return on that money, and explain to you, who are undecided shareholders, where you're going to put your vote. But it's a very, very, very fair question. And we have got very little wriggle room.
And so when you hear Labour, for example, talking about the kind of things they would like to spend money on, and you hear the Conservatives, some of them flirting with the idea of possible tax cuts before an election.
Well, I come from the camp. I was asked this the other day publicly. I mean, I do not think at the moment, despite the fact inflation has come down. It was horrendous last year. Remember, it's come down to 3.9%. Okay, we've got GDP figures, I think, tomorrow. Inflation may come down again next month, but it may not. You've got a problem in the Red Sea. You've got other inflationary pressures still coming through. Inflation may not come down below 4% for a bit. Remember, that's twice as high as the Bank of England's forecast. So I think they're being a bit optimistic. And if I might say so, all of us might be a bit optimistic about how quickly interest rates can afford to come down. I wouldn't expect them to come down before the end of the year. And I might argue that if they come down too early, we might regret it in 2025. So, yes, it's tough. But that does mean that if you can't spend the money, you either have to save it somewhere else, or you can't spend it today, you have to spend it tomorrow. Now, I'm afraid, dare I mention the words Mrs. Thatcher in here, but, she always used to say we can't live beyond our expectations.
Anand.
I mean, the problems are severe. I don't think they're intractable.
But the question specifically is, will it make much difference who wins, given that fact?
It will be a constraint on whatever government, and I think actually both parties probably need to be more honest about the fact that the fiscal environment we're in means that we face some very, very difficult choices. One of those choices is, I just said the tax take's the highest it's been since the 1940s. We're still sort of mid-range as a country in terms of how much we pay in tax. And one of the things we as voters need to decide is if we want a functioning health service, if we want good education, if we want infrastructure in this country, should we pay more tax than we currently do? There was a very interesting point made by the gentleman at the back earlier about wealth. And I think he really is onto something here, because one of the scandals of our tax system is the vast majority of tax comes from income. Very little of tax revenue comes from wealth. And things like, if you think about the ridiculous situation where our council tax is set on 1991 valuations. Think back to what houses were worth then. These are things that politicians are reluctant to think about because we as voters tend to punish them if they threaten us with higher taxes. But, it's not just the political parties that have got difficult choices to make. I think we as voters have got difficult choices to make because, if we want the sort of country that I think we all want, it might just cost us a little bit more one way or the other. I think finding ways to tax wealth more effectively is one of the potential solutions ahead.
Which is a point made by a man at the back earlier on. Yes, we heard from you. What's your name? We heard from you at the beginning.
It's Kyle.
Kyle. So we heard from you at the beginning.
Yeah.
So what do you want to say now?
Thanks. Lisa, you made some really good points earlier on policies that you might want to bring in. Now, kind of linked to this of balancing the books, what would make a Labour vote better than my previous Conservative one for balancing those books, but also being able to bring in policies like you talk about to try and make the UK a better place all round while getting out of this situation we're in financially?
Well, when I speak to businesses in my constituency, one of the biggest challenges that they have at the moment, they want to invest, they want to grow. The startups in particular need some support to be able to go from being startups to being really successful major employers. And one of our policies is to pay particular attention to startups. Rachel Reeves has announced that we'll invest in 100,000 new startups, including mentoring support to help them make that leap. But what they want most of all is clarity. They want consistency. They want certainty. The house builders don't want to be dealing with a planning system that can change 3 times in a year and 17 different housing ministers. They don't want to be dealing with Brexit rules that can change at the whim of a group of Tory backbenchers. They want to know that this is a good place to invest and that they can continue to do that for the foreseeable future. So we've put a strong emphasis on stability, consistency, partnering with business and with communities to make sure that we get those systems right and that we can continue to encourage investment here in the UK. Because in the end, the gentleman who asked the question is right. We've got the highest tax burden on working people in a generation, and people simply can't afford more of that. We have
and the question was about what difference will it make, which party you vote for. Say, for example, tax thresholds have been frozen for some considerable time. That is one of the reasons why people are paying so much more tax. Labour is not committing to doing anything about it, to changing that.
We are not going to go into an election saying that we'll raise the tax burden on working people. People are paying out an enormous proportion of their income.
You're not saying you're going to lower it either. That's the point I'm making.
By other measures. Well, look, we want to do everything that we can to make life easier for people, but the best way to do that is to grow the economy. That's why on housing, where we're promising to get we're promising to get significant numbers of housing built. On energy, where we're promising to have a long-term plan for investment so that we can turn Britain into a clean energy superpower. These are all things that we did last time we were in government, but it's even more important now than ever that we have a plan for growth in this country. That is the route out of this crisis, and that's why voting for Labour will make a difference, not just for you, but for the generation that comes afterwards.
In the very colourful stripy jumper there, yes.
My question would be how you, and specifically some of the members of this panel, can justify the extreme wealth disparity in this country, and especially with how many at the moment are living in poverty, how you can justify
how you can justify that disparity.
How you can justify that disparity, and how you can justify...
I'll come to that. And the woman next to you had a question as well, so I'll deal with both at the same time.
Yeah, mine was really about what I want to hear. And I want to hear two things, really. More about the long term rather than the short term. You know, this country seems to work to the next 4 years, the next 5 years, the next election. And I also want to hear about what the previous government has done, which is going to be continued, because Andrea said something which was joy to my heart after 25 years of working with children and families about looking at developing children and families. But it smacks of the Sure Start centres, which the Conservative government came in and closed. It feels to me purely because they were a Labour initiative, not because they were making a real difference to children. And now I hear, 15 years on, that that's being restarted. We need more long-term... I want to hear more about long-term planning and keeping the good things going, as well as replacing the things that are not working so well.
Andrea?
Yeah, well, to tackle your point head-on, I totally agree with you. I was a huge fan of Sure Starts and Tessa Jowell, who introduced them as a Labour minister 25 years ago. She's passed away, sadly, but we used to talk about this together. And what we both agreed is that Sure Starts were about buildings. It was a fantastic initiative. And in a lot of places, they did develop the services to support families. But what the family hubs that I've championed for many years and the Prime Minister fully supports and has put money into, it's like a 21st century version of Sure Starts. So a lot of the Sure Starts are still around. It's not true that they're all shut down. There's about 3,500 of them in England. And what they are, many of them are now converting to family hubs. The point about family hubs being that you will have your midwifery, your health visiting, your parent-infant relationship support, your mental health support, your breastfeeding support, your parenting education, your antenatal classes.
You had all of that in a
all
Sure
of that
Start.
in family hubs. Well, in some, but not in that many, Lisa. That's the sad truth of it. And also, not only that, but there will also be the hybrid and the virtual support, much more support for dads who feel they've been left out. So the idea is to be a one-stop shop, and really importantly, family hubs will go from the period straight after the conception of the baby, so you'll have all of that antenatal support, all the way up to when your child turns 19, or if they have disabilities, till 25.
Well,
so it's a real one-stop shop. It's designed for friendship.
I'm just keen to take it a little bit broader, because I hope you feel you've had a bit of an answer to your question.
I just wonder where we'd have been now if the one in my town hadn't been shut.
You just kept it going all those years. You're just nodding your head at that.
Oh, sorry. Well, I don't know where your town is, and I don't know how to answer that, except to say that
it might have carried on. I guess that's the point. And done the work that you thought it was doing. Well, look, to the point that the man was making there. Naturally, we heard at the back about getting wealthier people to pay more tax. The disparity between rich and poor, that's what you're saying, is something that concerns you.
So something like 5% of top earners pay about 50% of income tax, something of that region. We have a very strongly progressive taxation system in this country. And I do understand a lot of people would have us, soak the rich it's very, very, for many people, I totally understand that. And what we have in this country is opportunity and a social safety net which is there for everybody who needs it. There's a huge amount of support for people who are struggling. But what we're really focused on as a government is, for example, apprenticeships for young people, higher level apprenticeships,
Okay, I think we're getting off taxation. But just very briefly, because I want to move on, take another question. Lawrence's question was, will it make much difference who wins the next election? Anand's saying the party have just got to be more honest about what they can afford. Will it make much difference? Can you say to Lawrence, what can you say to Lawrence to persuade him that voting Conservative, for example, will make much difference in the next election when it comes to how much money he's got in his pocket?
Well, what we're focused on is getting inflation down. That is, at the end of the day, that is the one single thing you can do that will put more money in people's pockets, is if prices aren't rising exponentially and you're earning each year more than you are last year, net, you will be better off. And then we're focused on growing the economy. And, you know, that's the big difference between Conservative and Labour, is they have a much greater tolerance to borrowing. And what Conservatives are focused on is growing the economy,
which means that you've brought this country into, Andrea.
We've signed up to
the last 14 years never happened.
We've signed up to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is where 50% of global trade is forecast to come from over the next few years. The first European country to do that. Huge opportunity, to this gentleman's point about for fintech and financial services. We're the European fintech capital.
You're going to have, in the nicest possible, you're going to have your work
best-
cut out, because this man here, Carl, has been for 20 years, has been a Conservative voter. Is now
Yeah,
he may not vote Conservative.
We have the world's greatest financial services centre. We're building on that. The Prime Minister himself held the AI Technology Summit at Bletchley only recently.
All right.
Huge personal commitment to growing the economy. That's what.
All right.
That is what we're offering.
Let's move on. I want to get another question in if I can. How much? Yes, we've got time for another question from Mark Jones. Ah, there you are.
With home ownership a pipe dream for many and rental prices up 30% in the last 3 years, which party can I trust to meaningfully alleviate the housing crisis?
So come on, Mark, let's hear a little bit more from you then. So you don't know, do you have faith in no party at all? What would you like to see?
I guess where I'm coming from is I'm lucky to be from a generation where owning your own property was realistic. And I have two grown-up daughters who have just recently graduated, they've entered the workplace, but already one who's moved to London. Most of her wages go on renting a substandard property, and I really find it hard to see for her future how she's going to be able to afford to save, not to mention she's got student debt.
We've got Labour and Conservative here. What could either of them say to you that would win you a vote on this subject?
Well, I heard Lisa already mention about a certain amount of homes being built, but I think it needs to be homes that are affordable homes, for more social housing, because around Oxfordshire there are so many new developments springing up, but the prices are just astronomical. So for first-time buyers, they're just
they're
not
out of
realistic.
their league.
Absolutely.
OK, Anand, which party can I trust to meaningfully alleviate the housing crisis?
Well, Labour have made a bold pledge to build 1.5 million new houses. The Tories have also talked about building houses. I think we just need to find a way of going round planning. I mean, the Green Belt has become an excuse for inaction, which has meant not just our kids struggle to get on the housing ladder, it means that people struggle to move to places where there are jobs. It means that affordable housing is a pipe dream.
And when you say going around planning, what that means in practice, in some cases, is ignoring local opposition.
Is ignoring local opposition, yeah.
So possibly from people like those sitting in our...
And I know, I mean, God, I've lived through enough local elections in Oxford to know that there are objections to house building here, but actually, this is a national problem. Building houses is a pathway to growth. Building houses is a pathway to getting people in houses that they can own or at least afford to rent. It is a good for the national economy, and I don't think local protest should be allowed to get in the way of that, quite frankly, at the moment. It is one of the very few... Keir Starmer spoke recently about pulling the growth lever. House building is one of the few ways to growth the government can do that is relatively cost-free.
And just explain how that works, for those who are not as familiar with it.
Because if you have investment... if you have private sector investment in developing because the planning restrictions are removed, then actually that generates economic activity. It also helps generate economic activity because it means that people can move to where the jobs are. So it's an all-round good thing, but we have been stymied by this sort of local opposition to, yes, we want houses, but not here. And I think it's time that national government took on local opposition and said, actually, we need to start doing this now for the good of the country.
Lisa, as you mentioned before, this is something that Labour want to do. How are you going to get round the point of local opposition? Because it sounds all very well in theory. you know, if people don't like it, it's tough. We're just going to build our houses anyway. But when it comes to the constituency MP who's thinking about re-election at some point, and in the teeth of the opposition of local people, they're not going to want that to happen, are they?
Yeah, well, look, two things about that.
And neither are some of the voters.
Because Anand's right, that there is no solution to the housing crisis or to the growth crisis without getting more homes built. We've reached a point in this country where we've got 1 million people stuck on social housing waiting lists. We've got a private rented sector that increasingly resembles the Wild West. We've got a generation shut out of home ownership, and that's before Liz Truss crashed the economy and sent mortgages through the roof. And we've also seen house building falling off a cliff, in part because of exactly the dynamic.
I think everyone knows
how
bad it is, because everyone's living with it. But in terms of what I'm trying to win people's votes.
I'm trying to explain exactly why we've made that commitment to build 1.5 million homes. Because
and what will you do about this issue of ignoring local opposition in particular?
It's not something that any other political party is promising to do, but the way in which that you get those homes built is partly about the stability and certainty that I was talking about earlier, about creating an environment where you don't have 17 housing ministers and several different planning changes
just
a year.
To Anand's point,
it's partly about reforming the planning system, because one of the big problems with the planning system at the moment is that people are only brought into the conversation not just about where homes get built, but about the sort of housing that gets built right at the end, when the deal has already been done and there's very little to discuss. It's a yes or a no answer. So our proposal is you bring the community in at the outset to get to decide on those things, including significant new numbers of social housing, and including ensuring that when you talk about affordable housing, it is actually genuinely affordable, which most affordable housing is not. My sense as someone who's been a constituency MP for the last 13 years is that people strongly support us getting Britain building. What they won't support is £500,000 houses in parts of the country where people live on very low incomes and their kids are being forced to move hundreds of miles away. It's time we brought people back into the conversation at the outset so that we can break down some of this nonsense that politicians haven't had the courage to take on and get this country building again.
Stuart, which party can I meaningfully trust to alleviate the housing crisis? That's what Mark is asking.
So again?
Which party can be trusted to alleviate the housing crisis?
Well, listen, it is a crisis and it's a problem, and it's been a problem for a long, long time. So you can pin the tail on the Labour donkey and you can pin the tail on the Conservative donkey.
But looking forward, because this is just to remind you, an audience of undecided voters here, which party can be trusted to alleviate the crisis?
It goes back to my point, Fiona, that interrogate the people that you might be voting for and ask them what they are going to do, because it's action. But
what do you think, Stuart? What's your opinion?
If it were me, I would find some system where I could actually insist on having a quota for each of the constituencies in the country. Now, Michael Gove has given an aspiration, not a target. Aspiration's fine. I could have an aspiration to do this, that and the other tomorrow, but I'm not giving you a firm commitment to a target. Make people have a target. There are NIMBYs all over the place. Everybody wants more houses, but not in my backyard. So we have to find a way to get them into people's backyards and accept, just like the debate we haven't had tonight about immigration, how are we going to make sure that these immigrants which are coming here are going to get spread around the country in an equal way?
Man there with the glasses. I presume you want to make a point very strongly because we put both your hands up.
Both arms up. Good evening. All I'm really after is both the politicians to be a bit bolder, a bit braver, because all we're looking at is to get our vote for the next election, but really what we want is the next 10 years. So why aren't we talking about the high street? Why aren't we talking about using parents' houses as a vehicle to allow their children to buy houses?
What, selling their houses, you mean?
No, but actually using that as a guarantee.
Right, OK. Yeah. I mean, we are asked... The questions we've got here reflect the majority of questions that you asked, so just in case you're wondering, that's how we've come to the conclusion we have. So this is reflecting what you wanted to ask. Let me just, if you don't mind, I'll go back to Andrea so she can answer the question that Mark asked. With home ownership a pipe dream for many, which party can I trust to meaningfully alleviate the housing crisis?
So, you know,
Why should we trust you?
It's been a huge challenge for all parties for many years, and we've talked about some of the problems with it, and actually, when the Conservatives first came into office, we managed to get the annual new build rate up to something like 400,000. I can't even remember the number.
Well, shall I give you the stats? Because I've got them here, actually. So since it's very helpful. Since 2010 to 2022, an average of 166,000 homes per year have been up. Sometimes a lot more, sometimes a lot less. That compares to 2 Conservative pledges, first of all 200,000 and then 300,000 a year. The average is 166,000, so you're way short.
Yeah, and it is fundamentally a challenge for planning, and there has been a new planning guidance. It's a challenge for government as well. Well,
you set the pledges,
government
you're not meeting them.
Government sets the planning, exactly. So it is a huge challenge for government. In fact, just now, new planning guidance has been set out, which does seek to bring communities much more into it, because as you've just aired, there is a challenge with people who don't want that housing in their backyard. But as a constituency MP in the Midlands, which is one of the fastest growing, we have thousands of new houses, and my concern isn't so much the number of new houses as whether they are fit for first-time buyers. And actually what I would like to see much more of is the shared equity schemes and also the extensions to houses, which we've done quite a lot of work on, so that you can build a granny annex, for example, or a small extension to have your children live in with their first child or whatever. But actually a lot more flexible ways of building that enable shared equity and also social housing to be bought by those tenants within it. And those are some of the things that I think will be part of our future policy.
We've got a couple of minutes left, and I thought it just occurred to me, really. It'd be interesting to go back to the people that we spoke to at the very beginning. You've had about an hour of this now. Are you in any way more decided than when you entered the room? So we came to you first in the spotty dress. Have you heard anything that's enticed you into how you might vote?
I've heard some fabulous stuff. But I'm going to take it away and think about it. Thank you.
OK. So, no, I think that... Yes, Kyle?
I think there's a long way to go yet to the election. A lot more to be heard and a lot more to be pondered.
So, not swayed?
Not yet, no.
Oh, my goodness. OK. No. What about you?
I'm afraid I'm not swayed either.
OK. No, sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, although Lisa Nandy is way more believable than Keir Starmer.
What next to you?
I want to see change. I'm not seeing that here tonight.
To you, it feels like the status quo?
Yeah.
OK. One thing that that either Andrea or Lisa could have said that would have brought you around?
I think it's this opportunity to how do we make it much more equal for everyone to contribute to the economy, and it's connected to generative AI. We have this fantastic opportunity to level up every corner of this country, not hearing about it.
All right, and yes, can I come back to you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
So has nothing swayed you either? I mean, I'm not sure how optimistic I was, to be honest. I don't want to sound naive about this. I mean, you've had... months and months, years to think about this. I'm assuming, looking at you, you're going to be voting for the first time.
I'm not going to be voting. I'm not 18 yet. I'm not going to be 18.
Oh, you're not going to make it to that point. But were you to vote, you still don't know how you would vote?
Yeah.
OK. Well, let's hear from a few other people. We've got about a minute left. Who's got their hands up? Yes, the woman there in the black top with the glasses, yeah.
I could, if, for example, you benefit to the opportunity of international students that have the increase of the university fees in difference in comparison with the UK university fees. This panel could have the opportunity to influence of this. For the students, we have a lot of students that want to study in
Particularly
England.
Here in Oxford, yes, absolutely. So, and international students pay a lot more. That's your point.
So, for example, if we have a status, I have a status, for example, I can access for the UK home fees, but international students cannot pay visas.
So you'd like to see something on that?
Yeah.
OK. Well, look, thank you for your point. And thank you, all of you. Sorry, there's lots of you with your hands up, but I'm afraid we've come to the end of our hour, so forgive me. I hope you found it interesting and it's given you food for thought. We came into this programme knowing that you're all undecided, and we thought, well, let's hear, and let's see if there's anything that you want to hear that will affect how you will vote. And I guess we will find out almost certainly this year. By the sounds of it, towards the end of the year. So, for now, our hour is up. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to all of you for coming along here tonight. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time in Oxford, bye-bye.